De la fan story intro Theo dung ka truck vayu ka qua ban. Edit, mock me again. The single dad waiter said. The billionaire suddenly went silent. What could make those words change everything in a single moment? Why would a billionaire suddenly fall silent after hearing such a simple statement? Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are truly grateful you are here to share another heartfelt journey with us. If you enjoy stories about dignity, kindness, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you for your continued support and for being part of this wonderful community. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what do you think those words in the title really mean? Now, let us step inside this remarkable story and discover how an ordinary moment can become unforgettable. Some people mistake a quiet heart for a weak one, until silence becomes the loudest answer in the room. The words drifted gently through the elegant dining room just moments before everything changed. Beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers and the warm glow of golden lights, Sterling House welcomed Chicago's wealthiest guests with polished silver, fresh flowers, and the comforting aroma of butter, rosemary, and sizzling steaks. Every table was reserved. Every server moved with careful precision. Every smile looked practiced. Ethan Brooks carried a polished serving tray through the crowded restaurant with the calm confidence of a man who never rushed, even when every seat was filled. At 40 years old, he had mastered the quiet rhythm of hospitality. He greeted every guest by name whenever possible, remembered favorite meals without writing them down, and thanked the kitchen staff after every completed order. Most customers noticed only that he was a waiter. Very few noticed the quiet dignity with which he carried himself. That evening, the heavy glass doors opened, and nearly every employee instinctively looked toward the entrance. Victoria Ashford stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that reflected the understated elegance of someone who no longer needed expensive jewelry to announce her success. She was one of America's most recognizable business leaders, a billionaire whose interviews inspired entrepreneurs across the country. The restaurant manager hurried forward personally to greet her, while several guests whispered her name beneath their breath. Victoria accepted the attention with polite confidence before taking her usual table near the center of the dining room, where everyone could see her without making it appear intentional. Ethan approached with a welcoming smile and a menu already prepared for her preferred dinner. Good evening, Ms. Ashford. It is wonderful to see you again. I hope your evening has been treating you well. Victoria barely glanced at the menu before studying Ethan instead. Her eyes paused on his neatly pressed white shirt, his carefully tied black necktie, and the modest apron wrapped around his waist. A faint smile appeared across her face, but it carried more amusement than warmth. Tell me, she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to sit on this side of the table instead of standing beside it every night? Several guests exchanged uncomfortable smiles. Ethan remained perfectly still. I hope every guest who sits here enjoys their evening, he answered gently. That is enough for me. Victoria leaned back in her chair, clearly expecting something different. Surely a man spends his life wishing for something greater than carrying dinner plates. A few quiet laughs drifted across the room. One businessman shook his head while pretending not to listen. Another guest lowered her eyes toward her coffee cup. Ethan carefully placed a glass of water before Victoria without spilling a single drop. His movements remained slow, respectful, and unhurried. Victoria folded her hands together. You really are content with this? She asked. Ethan met her gaze calmly. Every honest job deserves respect, ma'am. She laughed softly, then replied with a confidence that had won countless negotiations. Respect is earned through success. Ethan's expression never changed. He looked at her with quiet kindness before speaking the words that instantly seemed to absorb every sound inside Sterling House. Mock me. Again. The sentence was neither angry nor defensive. It was simply spoken with absolute certainty. Forks stopped halfway to plates. Conversations disappeared one table after another. Even the pianist resting near the grand piano hesitated before touching the next key. Victoria stared at Ethan, momentarily unsure whether she had truly heard him correctly. Before either of them spoke another word, the entrance doors opened once more. A distinguished gentleman wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal overcoat stepped inside, paused near the reception desk, and slowly scanned the dining room. The instant his eyes settled on Ethan Brooks, surprise crossed his face, followed immediately by unmistakable respect. Ethan Brooks did not look toward the entrance. He simply offered Victoria Ashford the same respectful nod he gave every guest, then quietly excused himself to continue serving the surrounding tables. Whatever reaction she expected had never arrived. There had been no anger, no embarrassment, and certainly no attempt to defend himself. Instead, his calm seemed to linger over the dining room like the last note of a familiar song. The distinguished gentleman remained near the hostess stand for a few moments, his eyes never leaving Ethan, as if he were making certain he had not mistaken the face before him. Meanwhile, the restaurant slowly returned to life. Glasses clinked softly once again. Conversations resumed in cautious whispers. The pianist continued playing a gentle melody that floated through the room with effortless grace. Ethan carried 2 plates of grilled salmon to a nearby family, smiling warmly as he knelt beside a little girl struggling to reach her lemonade. He carefully moved the glass closer without being asked. Her parents thanked him, and he simply replied, "I hope your evening becomes a wonderful memory." A few tables away, an elderly couple tried to settle into their chairs while balancing heavy winter coats. Before another employee could notice, Ethan crossed the room, folded their coats neatly over a nearby stand, adjusted the gentleman's chair, and made sure the woman could comfortably reach the breadbasket. He never rushed. He never expected gratitude. To him, kindness was simply part of the job. Victoria found herself watching every movement despite telling herself she had more important things to think about. She had spent decades studying people across negotiation tables, believing character revealed itself under pressure. Yet this waiter remained impossible to read because nothing seemed capable of disturbing his quiet confidence. A few minutes later, one of the newest servers accidentally mixed 2 dinner orders and froze with panic beside the kitchen entrance. Ethan stepped beside the young man, smiled reassuringly, and quietly reorganized the plates before whispering, "Slow down. The guests are waiting for dinner, not perfection." The young server exhaled with visible relief and hurried toward the correct tables. No manager noticed the moment. No applause followed. Ethan simply returned to work as though helping others required no recognition. Victoria slowly folded her napkin and looked around the restaurant. She realized something unusual. Every employee greeted Ethan with genuine affection. The chefs thanked him. The hostess smiled whenever he walked past. Even the dishwasher waved cheerfully through the kitchen window as Ethan carried another tray inside. Respect surrounded him naturally, earned without authority or wealth. Across the room, the distinguished gentleman finally handed his coat to the hostess and began walking deeper into the restaurant with measured steps. Several regular customers recognized him immediately and quietly exchanged surprised glances. His name was Richard Whitmore, founder of one of the country's most respected financial firms and a man whose advice influenced executives from coast to coast. Yet instead of heading toward his reserved table, Richard walked directly toward Ethan. His expression carried neither curiosity nor politeness. It carried recognition. As Ethan turned after delivering another meal, their eyes met. For the first time that evening, a faint smile appeared on Ethan's face that was different from every courteous smile he had offered the guests. It was the smile of someone unexpectedly seeing an old chapter of life quietly returning through the front door. Richard Whitmore stopped only a few feet from Ethan Brooks and smiled with the quiet warmth of someone who had unexpectedly found an old friend after many years. Ethan set his serving tray carefully onto a nearby station before extending his hand. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore. It has been a long time." Richard shook his hand firmly, his expression filled not with surprise anymore, but genuine admiration. "It certainly has, Ethan. I had hoped our paths would cross again someday, although I never imagined it would happen here." Around them, several nearby conversations softened into whispers. The restaurant manager immediately recognized Richard and hurried over, prepared to escort him to his private table, but Richard politely raised one hand. "Give me just a moment, please. I would like to speak with my friend first." The word friend echoed more loudly than anyone expected. Victoria Ashford slowly lowered the coffee cup she had been holding. She knew Richard Whitmore well enough to understand that he chose his words carefully. He did not casually describe people that way, especially not someone wearing a waiter's apron. Ethan smiled modestly. "I hope business has been treating you well." Richard laughed softly. Better than well. Thanks in no small part to lessons I learned from someone standing right in front of me. Ethan quietly shook his head. You always gave your team too much credit. Richard answered immediately. No, Ethan. I probably never gave you enough. Before Ethan could respond, another table requested assistance. Excuse me for just one moment, he said kindly. Duty comes first. Richard nodded with obvious respect. Of course it does. Ethan crossed the dining room, carrying fresh coffee to an elderly couple, stopping briefly to help the gentleman read the evening dessert menu beneath the dim candlelight. He patiently described each option until the couple smiled with appreciation before making their choice. Afterward, Ethan returned without appearing rushed. Richard watched him carefully, then turned toward Victoria. Do you notice something? Victoria looked puzzled. What do you mean? Richard glanced toward Ethan. He treats every person exactly the same. Whether they own $1 billion or only enough for dinner tonight, they receive the same respect. That is much harder than building a successful company. Victoria remained silent. She had noticed it herself, but had not known how to explain the feeling. Richard smiled again as Ethan rejoined them. Do you still remember what you told our leadership team during your very first strategy meeting? Ethan looked thoughtful for a moment before quietly answering. Take care of people first. Everything else follows. Richard nodded. I wrote those words in the front of my notebook that day. I still have it. Several employees nearby exchanged confused glances. None of them had ever imagined their quiet co-worker had once attended executive meetings with one of the country's most respected business leaders. Victoria finally spoke, her curiosity overcoming her hesitation. Mr. Whitmore, forgive me for asking, but who exactly is Ethan Brooks? Richard looked at Ethan, silently asking permission before saying anything further. Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment, then offered a small nod. Richard took a slow breath. Ms. Ashford, I believe you have spent the evening seeing only a waiter. The truth is, years ago entire boardrooms waited for Ethan Brooks to speak before making decisions that shaped the future of companies across America. And that was only the beginning of a story very few people ever truly understood. The restaurant grew noticeably quieter after Richard Whitmore's words settled over the room. Even those who pretended not to listen found themselves stealing brief glances toward Ethan Brooks as he continued working exactly as he had only minutes earlier. He thanked the chef as another order appeared in the service window, adjusted a centerpiece that had shifted slightly on a nearby table, and smiled warmly at a young couple celebrating their anniversary before wishing them many happy years together. Nothing about his manner suggested he enjoyed becoming the center of attention. If anything, he seemed eager for the evening to return to normal. Richard watched him with quiet admiration before looking back at Victoria Ashford. You see, what impresses me most, he said softly, is not who Ethan used to be. It is who he chose to become. Victoria remained silent, her confidence slowly giving way to genuine reflection. Richard continued. More than 10 years ago, Ethan walked into our headquarters as one of the brightest strategic minds I had ever interviewed. He was brilliant, but that was never what separated him from everyone else. His greatest gift was understanding people before he ever tried to solve business problems. Every meeting began with the same question. How will this decision affect the families who depend on us? Many executives talked about numbers first. Ethan always talked about people. Richard smiled faintly, as though revisiting a treasured memory. During one difficult year, several advisors recommended laying off hundreds of employees to protect quarterly profits. Ethan stayed behind after everyone else had left the boardroom. He spent the entire night building another plan. The next morning, he presented a strategy that protected the company without forcing hardworking families to lose their income. It required more patience, more creativity, and more personal responsibility from leadership. We accepted his recommendation. The company recovered, and those families stayed together because one man believed balance sheets should never matter more than human lives. Victoria looked toward Ethan, who was carefully helping an elderly guest fold a blanket across her knees after the evening air drifting through the entrance had become unexpectedly cool. He performed the small act with the same quiet care Richard had just described inside executive meetings years earlier. The setting had changed, but the man had not. Richard lowered his voice. Then life tested him in a way no business challenge ever could. His wife became seriously ill. Every opportunity in the world stood before him, but Ethan chose to step away from promotions, recognition, and everything he had built because his family needed him. After she passed away, he devoted himself completely to raising his little girl. I offered him another executive position more than once. He thanked me every time, but he always gave the same answer. My daughter will only be this age once. Victoria felt the weight of those words settle deeply inside her heart. She had spent years believing sacrifice always meant giving up comfort in pursuit of success. Ethan had quietly shown her another definition entirely. Success sometimes meant giving up success itself for someone you loved. Across the dining room, Ethan finished serving another table before noticing Richard and Victoria still watching him. He smiled politely, almost embarrassed by the attention, then picked up another tray and continued working with the same steady grace that had never depended on titles, wealth, or applause. At that moment, Victoria understood something that no business school had ever taught her. Greatness did not disappear when a remarkable person put on an ordinary uniform. Sometimes it became easier to recognize. Victoria Ashford remained seated long after her coffee had grown cold. Around her, Sterling House continued its familiar rhythm of polished service and quiet conversation, yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. She watched Ethan Brooks move through the dining room with the same patient grace he had shown since the moment she arrived. He stopped to congratulate a retired couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary, carefully placing a complimentary dessert in front of them after quietly arranging it with the pastry chef. Moments later, he noticed a young father trying to calm a restless little boy and returned carrying a small paper napkin folded into the shape of a sailboat. The child's eyes brightened instantly, and the father's exhausted smile spoke louder than words. Ethan simply nodded and continued on his way without waiting for thanks. Richard Whitmore observed the scene with quiet satisfaction before turning toward Victoria once again. "Do you understand now why I never stopped hoping to find him?" She answered honestly. "I understand more than I did an hour ago, but I still feel as though I have only seen the surface." Richard smiled gently. "Then let me tell you one more thing. Years ago, after Ethan left our company, several firms tried to recruit him. They offered extraordinary salaries, private offices, and positions that most executives spend entire careers chasing. Every offer was declined." Victoria looked surprised. Why would anyone walk away from opportunities like that? Richard glanced toward Ethan, who was helping a new hostess learn the seating chart without making her feel embarrassed for asking questions. "Because he once told me something I have never forgotten." Richard paused before repeating Ethan's words exactly as he remembered them. "If success costs me the moments my daughter will remember forever, then I have paid far too much." Victoria lowered her eyes. Those simple words carried more weight than any speech she had heard at a leadership conference. At that moment, Ethan returned to check on their table. "Is there anything else I can bring you this evening?" he asked with the same calm courtesy as always. Victoria looked up at him for several seconds before answering. "Yes, there is. I would like to ask you a question, if you do not mind." Ethan smiled politely. "Of course." She hesitated, searching for words she rarely needed. "Do you ever regret leaving the life Mr. Whitmore described?" Ethan glanced briefly toward the large front windows where the evening lights shimmered across downtown Chicago. "Not for a single day," he answered softly. "Every afternoon my daughter runs toward me after school, as though I am the most important person in the world. No promotion could ever replace that feeling." Richard quietly smiled, knowing the answer before the question had even been asked. Victoria felt something inside her shift in a way she had not expected. For years she had believed that achievement meant constantly climbing higher. Ethan had shown her that sometimes the strongest person was the one willing to step away when love required it. Before she could say another word, the restaurant manager approached Ethan and quietly informed him that his shift had ended. Ethan thanked him, removed his apron with careful hands, folded it neatly over one arm, and wished every coworker a peaceful evening before preparing to leave. As he walked toward the employee entrance, nearly every member of the staff offered him a warm farewell. None of them realized they were witnessing something far greater than the end of another workday. They were watching a man whose quiet example had already begun changing hearts without ever asking anyone to notice. The next morning, Chicago awakened beneath a pale autumn sky washed with soft gold as Ethan Brooks followed the routine that mattered more to him than any schedule hanging inside an executive office. He prepared blueberry pancakes before sunrise because Lily had once said Saturdays tasted happier with blueberries. He packed her lunch even though school offered meals because he liked slipping handwritten notes inside the lunchbox that always ended with the same sentence. I believe in you. After walking her to school, he returned to Sterling House for the afternoon shift with the same quiet gratitude that had carried him through every season of life. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford arrived at the headquarters of Ashford Global Holdings, but the towering glass building no longer felt exactly the way it had only a day before. Executives greeted her confidently. Assistants hurried through the hallways carrying reports and presentation folders. Quarterly forecasts waited neatly arranged inside the boardroom. Normally, Victoria would have walked directly to the head of the table and begun discussing profits within minutes. Instead, she paused beside the reception desk and asked the receptionist how long she had been working there. The young woman blinked with pleasant surprise before smiling. 5 years, ma'am. Victoria thanked her sincerely before continuing down the hallway. Several employees exchanged puzzled looks. They had never seen their chief executive begin the morning that way. Throughout the day, she found herself noticing people she had once overlooked. She thanked the maintenance crew repairing a light fixture. She stopped to compliment the cafeteria staff after lunch. She asked an intern about his family before discussing his project. Every small conversation reminded her of Ethan's quiet example. Leadership begins with how we treat people who cannot offer us anything in return. Those words echoed through her thoughts long after each meeting ended. Late that afternoon, she invited Richard Whitmore into her office overlooking the Chicago skyline. Richard accepted the invitation with his familiar calm smile. Victoria closed the conference room door before speaking. Richard, yesterday changed something inside me. I keep wondering how many remarkable people I have failed to recognize because I was looking at titles instead of character. Richard nodded thoughtfully. That realization is uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of wisdom. Victoria walked toward the window. Do you think Ethan would ever consider advising our leadership team? Richard smiled gently. Perhaps, but only if the work never asked him to become someone different from the man he already is. She looked back at him. I do not want to change him. I want our company to learn from him. Richard's expression brightened. Then invite him for exactly that reason. Do not offer him prestige. Offer him purpose. That evening, as Ethan finished another honest day's work, he stepped outside into the cool air carrying the same modest backpack he had brought every day for years. Across the street, a familiar black sedan quietly pulled to the curb. Victoria stepped out alone before the driver could reach the door. She walked toward Ethan without the confidence of a billionaire addressing an employee, but with the humility of one human being hoping another might spare a few moments of conversation. Ethan greeted her with the same warm smile he had offered from the very beginning. Good evening, Ms. Ashford. Is everything all right? Victoria returned the smile, holding a simple cream-colored envelope in her hands. I hope it will be, she answered softly, if you are willing to walk with me for a few minutes. They began walking side by side beneath rows of maple trees whose amber leaves drifted gently across the quiet Chicago sidewalk. The evening air carried the comforting scent of fresh coffee from a nearby corner cafe, while distant traffic blended into a soft background that seemed to invite honest conversation. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Ethan never hurried silence. He had learned long ago that important words usually arrived after people stopped trying to impress one another. Victoria Ashford finally broke the quiet. I have replayed our conversation in my mind more times than I can count. I realized something that has been difficult for me to admit. Ethan looked at her with patient attention. Sometimes admitting the truth is the strongest decision a person can make. Victoria smiled faintly. For years I believed success gave me the ability to judge people quickly. I thought experience had made me wise. Instead, it made me confident enough to stop asking questions. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. We all see the world through habits we do not notice. The important thing is deciding whether we are willing to change them. Victoria looked down at the cream-colored envelope she still carried. I judged you before I knew anything about you. I saw your uniform and believed I understood your story. I was completely wrong. Ethan's expression remained gentle. I have worn many different titles during my life. None of them ever changed who I was when I returned home. Victoria slowed her pace. That is exactly what I failed to understand. Richard helped me see your past, but watching you showed me your character. Those are not always the same thing. Ethan smiled warmly. Character is simply the part of us that remains after every title disappears. They reached a small neighborhood park where children laughed while chasing one another beneath fading sunlight. Parents sat quietly on nearby benches, enjoying ordinary moments that would someday become precious memories. Ethan paused for a moment, watching a father gently help his young son learn to ride a bicycle. His eyes reflected quiet happiness rather than longing. Victoria noticed the expression immediately. "You miss your daughter whenever you are away from her, do not you?" Ethan laughed softly. Every parent who truly pays attention probably does. Childhood moves much faster than business calendars. Victoria carefully handed him the envelope. "Inside is an invitation to become an executive advisor for my foundation. The position is completely flexible. You choose your schedule. Your daughter comes first. I am not asking you to return to the corporate world. I am asking you to help us become worthy of the people we serve." Ethan accepted the envelope respectfully, but did not open it. Instead, he looked toward the families enjoying the peaceful evening before turning back to Victoria. "Thank you for believing I still have something valuable to offer." She shook her head gently. "Ethan, after everything I have witnessed, I finally understand that your greatest value was never your business knowledge. It has always been the example you quietly give everyone around you." Ethan stood silently for a moment before answering. "If I accept, it will only be because I believe kindness can become part of a company's culture instead of remaining only an individual choice." Victoria smiled with genuine relief. "That is exactly why I hoped you would say yes." At that very moment, a cheerful young voice echoed across the park. "Daddy!" Lily Brooks ran toward them carrying a small backpack decorated with colorful music notes, her bright smile lighting Ethan's face long before she reached him. Victoria watched the reunion quietly and understood without another explanation why no executive office had ever been able to compete with this simple moment. 3 weeks later, quiet changes had begun spreading through Ashford Global Holdings in ways that could not be measured on financial reports. Executives no longer hurried past reception without greeting the staff. Department leaders spent time listening before giving instructions. Managers who had once focused only on quarterly targets now began every meeting by asking how their decisions would affect the people carrying them out. The transformation did not happen because of a new policy or an expensive consulting program. It began because one quiet father reminded everyone that respect grows strongest when it is freely given. Ethan Brooks accepted the advisory position exactly as promised, working only 2 afternoons each week while continuing his evening shifts at Sterling House. When several executives questioned why someone with his experience still waited tables, Ethan simply smiled and answered, "Honest work never becomes less honorable because life gives you another opportunity." Those words quietly found their way through the company hallways until employees began repeating them long after meetings had ended. Victoria Ashford noticed another unexpected change inside herself. She no longer entered conference rooms believing she had every answer. Instead, she arrived carrying a notebook where she wrote one simple reminder across the top of each page before every leadership meeting. "Listen before leading." Richard Whitmore smiled the first time he saw the sentence and quietly remarked that some lessons were worth learning twice. One Saturday afternoon, Ashford Global organized a volunteer event at a neighborhood community center where employees prepared meals, repaired classrooms, and helped children organize books inside the small library. Ethan spent most of the afternoon assembling shelves alongside maintenance workers rather than standing beside company executives. Victoria watched him laugh with volunteers, patiently teach teenagers how to use simple tools safely, and thank every person who offered even the smallest contribution. No cameras followed him. No reporters interviewed him. He worked exactly the same way he had served guests inside Sterling House, believing every person deserved equal respect regardless of title or profession. Later that afternoon, Lily Brooks arrived after finishing her music lesson. The moment she spotted her father, she hurried across the gymnasium with the joyful excitement that never failed to brighten Ethan's face. She proudly introduced herself to several volunteers before helping younger children arrange books alphabetically across freshly built shelves. Victoria quietly observed the father and daughter working side by side. Their conversations were ordinary. Their laughter was effortless. Their happiness required nothing expensive. Standing there among folding tables, donated books, and grateful families. Victoria finally understood something she had spent years searching for in boardrooms. Success was never meant to replace life. It was meant to support it. As the afternoon came to an end, she approached Ethan while volunteers folded chairs and swept the floor. "I used to believe I was building a successful company," she admitted softly. "Now I think we are finally building a meaningful one." Ethan looked around the room where employees, children, parents, and neighbors worked together without noticing who held important titles during the week. Then he smiled with the same quiet grace that had changed so many lives without ever demanding attention. When people feel respected, they naturally begin giving that same respect to someone else. That is how real change quietly travels farther than any speech ever could. Several months later, the grand ballroom of the Chicago Civic Leadership Forum shimmered beneath warm lights as community leaders, business owners, teachers, first responders, volunteers, and families gathered to celebrate people whose quiet actions had strengthened the lives of others. There were no celebrities walking across the stage that evening and no dramatic speeches promising impossible futures. Instead, every award honored ordinary people who had chosen kindness when no one was watching. Victoria Ashford stood behind the podium, looking across the audience with a calm smile that carried none of the pride she once believed was necessary for leadership. Richard Whitmore sat in the front row beside Lily Brooks, whose bright eyes searched the room until she spotted her father standing comfortably near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed as always. Victoria adjusted the microphone and allowed a gentle silence to settle before speaking. "There was a time when I believed success was measured by influence, titles, and the size of the office waiting behind closed doors. I thought I understood leadership because I had spent years building companies. Then one ordinary evening, I met someone who reminded me that the strongest leaders rarely announce themselves. They simply serve with dignity until others begin changing because of their example." She looked toward Ethan with sincere gratitude before continuing. "I once judged a man by the uniform he wore instead of the character he carried. That mistake became one of the greatest lessons of my life." The audience remained completely still, listening with quiet attention. Victoria smiled warmly. "Tonight, I would like to recognize someone who never asked for recognition. Someone who proved that respect earned through kindness lasts far longer than respect demanded through power. Ethan Brooks, would you please join me on the stage?" Soft applause filled the ballroom as Ethan slowly walked forward, looking almost uncomfortable with becoming the center of attention. He accepted the small crystal award with both hands before quietly thanking Victoria. The applause gradually faded until the room became perfectly silent once again. Ethan looked across the audience, then toward Lily, whose proud smile reminded him why every difficult decision had always been worthwhile. He spoke with the same calm voice that had never needed to become louder to be heard. "Every person you meet is carrying a story you cannot see. If we choose patience before judgment, kindness before pride, and respect before assumptions, we will leave every place better than we found it. Success is not measured by how many people know your name. It is measured by how many lives become lighter because you were present. No one interrupted. No one hurried to speak next." The silence itself became the loudest applause in the room. As the evening ended, Ethan and Lily stepped outside into the cool Chicago night, walking beneath a sky scattered with quiet stars. Lily slipped her hand into her father's and looked up with a smile. "Daddy, do you think people can really change?" Ethan looked toward the peaceful city lights before answering with gentle certainty. "Every new morning gives us another chance to choose who we become. The only question is whether we will choose with kindness." Together they continued down the quiet sidewalk, leaving behind a ballroom filled with people who would remember not the award, not the applause, and not the speeches, but the extraordinary dignity of an ordinary father who never tried to prove his worth because he had quietly lived it every single day.